5.
Oh, no, still people coming on here.
Awesome. They've exceeded expectations already.
All right, then.
Come on.
Karen, I like your background. Where did you find that? Oh, you're making me ready for.
Wow.
Oh,
Mango.
yes.
Food is always my thing. I love anything related to food. So
I thought she was talking to me, and I'm like, it's my kitchen.
I go hunting for fun things to put up.
Okay, folks. Well, I imagine people will still be joining us as we go. I did want to get this thing started so that people can get themselves, on with their days as well. Mornings, afternoons, evenings,
Let's
wherever.
not go into the time zone thing.
let's have a deep discussion about time. Just to make things easier, just for a moment here, I'm going to make sure that everyone is muted. And we're going to try to keep that until we get to the sort of Q&A and other discussion points. Hello, my name is Mark H. Rooney. I'm sure I know quite a lot, if not most, if not all of you. But thank you so much for turning out for today's Zoom meeting. This was something actually that the spark of this came from Karen Falkenstrom, aka KArizona, and she will actually be our keynote speaker for today. Basically, this is not an end-all be-all of like, okay, we're going to tell you all how to reopen your practice spaces. Rather, this is kind of the start of the conversation. This is the front end. This is almost pre-conversation, because what we'd like to do is get people kind of starting along the way. I think overall, and she can further expand on this, but Karen has basically been going through this process and has been, of course, coming up with some of the ideas and some of the challenges of that. And so what we're going to basically do is hear a case study of how Karen has been doing things for Odaiko Sonora and for her region. After that, there's going to be a little bit of Q&A in order to be able to ask some questions, specifically first about what Karen's process is. And at that point, we'd also like to, I'm going to expand it out after the Q&A to input. We would like to, we know that people are doing all kinds of variations of reopening or not reopening across the country right now, so, or around the world. So, hi to all people from around the world. So we would like to hear also from you, and I'll get to some prompts for that a little bit later on, but largely we're going to be asking for what are the questions that you had to ask yourself. All right, I just said I'd get to it later on. That's basically the prompt. What were the questions you had to ask yourself as you started to get into this process of reopening? The other thing I wanted to just kind of start out with as well is just in order to keep us on track, I'm going to really try to limit this discussion to not being about, we're not really here to discuss and debate the virtues of masks, or, you know, for those of you like me who've been drinking bleach and ingesting or injecting sunshine, you know, whether that actually is helping or not. That's not really what the discussion is about for today. So we're going to also, in a sense, I'm going to ask people to be very open, just to hear all sides, to hear what people are doing. We're trying to keep this a judgment-free zone as well, because everyone's situations are different, you know, across the stratosphere here. So I think that's pretty much the introduction there. But Karen, am I forgetting anything? Also here today, I also wanted to mention Christina Magaha. Did I say that correctly?
Miss McLaughlin.
What?
Christina McLaughlin.
McLaughlin. I'm so.
McLaughlin.
I was reading, you know, according to
Logic does Magaha.
yeah. McLaughlin, who's newly a staff with TCA, and is also helping us to facilitate. So thank you very much, Christina, for being on this as well. At this point, I am going to turn it over to Karen. Karen, how are you doing there? I'm going to spot
good.
you here.
All right. I am going to be going through a lot of information kind of quickly. There's a few things that we'll put into the chat field that are links and that sort of thing. Basically, I had to go through this process really early on because we own our studio and we have to prepare it for renters as well. And I figured as long as I went through the excruciating process of reopening the studio, I might as well share the information that I gathered in the process that hopefully you guys can use as you look at your situations. So this is really just one kind of template, but it's a very complex template, and it's early because I have to do that. So really quickly, I'm going to tell you about Odaiko Sonora, our structure, and how our studio works. So we own a large warehouse. It's 5,000 square feet. It's called Rhythm Industry Performance Factory, and we rent it. We make the mortgage by renting it to a lot of other arts groups in town that vary from individual people who do dance and aerial work to large troupes that do Afro-Brazilian dance and percussion. So it's a really big space, and I think if you looked at the picture that's on the invitation on Facebook, you'll see the space. It's very large. So one of the things that we didn't really have to worry too much about was being in a tiny space, and I know a lot of people will have to worry about that. So we're just going to go from, my process being I've got this huge space. It's too hot to be outside because it's like 108 degrees. So we really had to think about being inside and how that could be done safely. Odaiko Sonora, the taiko group, consists of the main body is a community group of recreational players who pay a membership fee every month. There's a group of students who are studying with hopes of becoming members once they learn a certain amount of material. We also have special sessions that are based on skills and drills and new repertoire and advanced stuff. And then we have a performing ensemble that has an understudies practice as well. So we have the luxury of as much space in our dojo as we want, which many people don't. Okay, so what I'm going to do is outline my process and hope that as you're listening, you can take out things that will be pertinent and useful to your situation. And I hope it'll help you formulate the questions you need to ask. I'm going to assume most of you have some leadership position in your group. Congratulations, and I'm sorry, this is going to be a tough one. So it's really important first to know where you stand on things like masks and distancing and the research out there. Not that you need to share your personal opinions, but know where you stand because you're going to be challenged, and if you know exactly what your opinions are about it, you're less likely to be triggered because there are a lot of opinions out there. So what I do, first I'm going to silence my phone so that doesn't happen again. What I did was I first thought, what do I really want? What do I believe should happen? And then as soon as I knew that, I wrote that on a piece of paper and I said, don't let this affect the way I'm making decisions because that's my opinion and this is about the community as a whole. But it does provide, the next thing you want to do is kind of figure out what is the end goal of your process, which is, for me, it was really simple. It's like, I need to create a safe environment for all kinds of people to do all kinds of work together in person. And it was that simple. And I put that on a Post-it and I stuck that on my computer so I could keep reminding myself that this is not about arguing about masks or whatever. This is about making a space safe for my people. And that was simple until we get started. Then it gets very complex. So I'm going to call out my touchstone to create a safe environment for diverse people in my space. You're going to want to return to that a lot, but I'm going to go through the process now really just nuts and boltsy. The first thing I did was I surveyed the stakeholders. I'm going to share my screen for a minute. show you my very simple SurveyMonkey survey, if I can find it. No, I can't. Well, I'll just put the link in, never mind. It's a really simple survey that says, I can find it here. Do you feel safe returning to the studio? And if no, you can skip to the end. How soon do you feel it's safe to resume in studio practices? Which of these things would you be willing to participate in? And that's everything from practicing individually on your own to the full group. Number 4 was, how important is it to you on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not at all important, 10 being extremely important, that other people that you're with are following social distancing in their daily lives? Number 5 was, what precautions are you taking in your daily life to prevent transmission? And that went from sheltering at home to basically going out there and partying. Number 6 was, the question was, what precautions would you require of all participants to observe in studio? And that was multiple choice. You could pick multiple answers, and included masks, distancing, hand washing, not sharing instruments, that sort of thing. And then number 7 was, please share any ideas that you have about in-studio practices resuming. And I'm going to put the link to that in the chat. You're welcome to look at it. It was definitely a little flawed in places, which I'll talk about in a minute, but overall, it gave me a sense of the landscape of opinions among the members of my group. And there was the first shocker. It was all over the map. There was definitely a majority of people who were leaning towards more cautious behavior. There's a handful of people who are on the really high risk level. And so that's something that you as a leader have to figure out how to navigate. So once I had the survey data in and I kind of crunched it, number 2, I formed a team. And you can't do this alone, so you want to look for allies to help back you up partly when you get a lot of grief. And also you need help with different viewpoints, and you need help researching and crafting language. So my team at first was 2 of our Odaiko Sonora board members, one who's a social service worker and one who has nursing experience, and our facilities manager, and myself. We went through a lot of different material to research best practices and scientific data on transmission, and we found an article by Dr. Evelyn Dacker, and it really spoke to us because it had a very community-based, kind of community responsibility-based approach to coming up with a list of how to judge your risk and coming up with a list of procedures. So all of this is going to be in a document, which I will now share. The web, this is shareable. You are welcome to copy, cut, paste as much as you want. It's a really long one because it's my Google Docs. That's the one after SurveyMonkey. So once I got a sense of where we wanted to go with this, we had a rubric. It also had a chart that it was a way of assigning yourself a risk category. And I'm going to see if I can go back to my screen share because I was having trouble before. There we go. This is the COVID care chart that came from Dr. Dacker's article. It really talked about these 4 things that you want to consider, and I really like the way she talked about the container, which is for each individual who they're in contact with on a daily basis. And then judging from that your risk tolerance, which I'll get to that chart in a minute, and then the agreements that you make as a group and the etiquette you observe to uphold those agreements. The chart that I adapted, so this was Dr. Dacker's chart. It went from very strict, which is they're not leaving, so you don't really need to worry about them too much because they're not coming to the dojo, to very open, which is they're pretty much just living life the way they did before March.
Karen,
Yeah.
if you mean to show the risk tolerance chart,
Yeah.
it isn't on the shared screen.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
No.
See. Thank you.
I could see it.
How's that? Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's in the document that I posted, so don't worry about reading it too carefully. But I just want you to know we set up I followed Dr. Dacker's guidelines here, or the rubric, but I also rewrote a lot of it to be more consistent and more applicable to our situations. And then once we had this rubric by which to kind of let people assign themselves so that other people had information about them, because I put forth the idea of informed opt-in, which is people deserve to know what risk category you're in if they're going to play with you. It comes from a medical idea of the informed consent. I called it informed opt-in. And with this care chart and the risk tolerance chart, the article by Dr. Dacker, and a bunch of other materials we put together, the team put together what we call the 6 pillars of protection. And these were guidelines for space usage, protocols for safety, and let me see, they included, this is in the document that I will send you, that I just posted the link for, but they included risk tolerance pods, agreements, hygiene, distancing, screening, and masks. I would probably reorganize those 6 pillars if I were doing this today, but because in general what we're really talking about is creating smaller groups of people who are following similar daily practices so that they feel safe together. They are in agreement and build trust. They agree to the protocols that we put in place for hygiene, the etiquette and distancing, that they are forthcoming about their own information, like if they're feeling sick or if they have been exposed to something, they tell people, and masks. I just pulled that out separately because there's so much debate about the masks. After that, I sent these guidelines out to our group members because our group members were going to be the test group for going back into the studio. If my group couldn't follow these protocols, then the other renters certainly were not going to. So I sent these out to the group members, all the stakeholders in my group, and asked for feedback and input. And I reviewed all that. And then I put together a document that was kind of a statement of purpose, our findings, the survey results, and let them know that the purpose right up front was that we're not going by a majority vote. This is not that kind of situation, but that based on research and the survey and the analysis of our particular situation, we were going to try to create as many possibilities for as many people as possible to get back in the studio and play on the real drums. That's the best we could do. And I did share the survey data because some people really like to look at that. And there were people that I knew were going to have trouble with the strict policies, and I wanted them to see that the majority of people in our group ranked what other people are doing in daily life at 10. Very important. So they didn't want to be playing with somebody who's out bar hopping. And the data pointed to that. Once I got a lot of feedback from my group, I tried to incorporate as much as I could. Number 7 on the survey was to propose other ideas about how we could proceed. And I will share the survey data with anyone who's interested. It's kind of interesting, but I don't want to take time to go over it right now. So given that, the next thing I did was create a plan to really communicate these effectively just to the group, to the students, and the other people in the studio. Because now at this point, the renters have to also be on board with these procedures so that the environment remains safe. Then the hard part was going down there and preparing the space, which was mopping and sanitizing, moving equipment, getting rid of stuff, setting up things so there was, surfaces could be handled as little as possible, that there was signage everywhere, that there would be a question in someone's mind. We designated through tape areas where shoes were not allowed. We set up sanitizing stations and posted disinfecting protocols, how to mix the bleach solution, and you name it. So there's signs everywhere in our studio now. So if you walk in, you're immediately, before you even walk in the space, you see the care chart and a list of basic requirements to even enter the building. And that also, you want a team to do that. You don't want to go down there and mop 3,500 square feet of floor by yourself. The other thing we did with the signage and taping areas off for particular events and sanitizing stations is we built in extra time at the front and end for every renter to sanitize when they came in and sanitize when they leave, and a time when groups could pass without encountering each other entering and leaving the building. Then the fun part came, which was talking to people about the pods they're going to be in. So the first pod was really simple because it was the performing ensemble. There's 4 of us. We were all number 2s on the risk tolerance chart, and we were almost immediately able to go back in and start playing together, following all the protocols. The next pod that seemed to be able to be willing to go in was a higher risk pod, and today's an interesting day because I just watched many, many days of really hard work trying to get those folks together in the studio. I just watched it crumble before my very eyes. So that pod is not happening right now. And we can go into more if you have questions about that afterwards, I'll talk about it a little bit. So this is where I want to say, as leaders of groups, it's going to get bumpy. When you start talking about what people have to do or need to do in order to go back to normal, people have a lot of feelings around this stuff, and you have feelings, so you have to be really careful about making sure you're taking time and you're not triggered, and that you remain, we'll say, a messenger and not the person defending some position, because your job as the leader is to move all the people and the parts into the best situation you can. It's not to convince anybody of anything. If they don't want to participate in the protocols you've set up, let them go. It's not worth arguing. And you probably already know some people in your groups who are not going to want to wear masks if that's what you decide is your protocol, who are not going to follow certain protocols, and just let it go. The main thing is to hold on to the critical mass of people who are going to keep your group running. And what I've found is I think the people who are willing to buy in with the slight inconveniences that the protocols require are going to build a stronger trust as a group. As the trust is built in each pod, then we'll start putting pods together. So instead of 3 to 6 people, we'll then have 6 to 12 people. And I see over the months that this could grow into the full group being together, trusting each other to follow safety protocols. One of the problems is right now here is we're up against summer. Things have always been slow in the summer, so that's going to put a little bit of a lag in the whole process because a lot of people leave town. But my goal is to make it safe enough eventually to have even the number 0s and 1s feel safe coming into the studio and playing drums with everybody. Please stay flexible in this and call on people who can help. Don't try to do this yourself. I will say that I'm available for discussions if anybody wants to talk about particular things, situations. I will do my best to advise or share wisdom if I have any. And you can email me or message me or call me on the phone. I'm there for you. So that's basically my process. People are back in the studio. They're following safety protocols. And we'll see what happens at this point, because one of the main responses about when to get back in the studio was like, I don't know, right? The numbers are going up again. So we're having to be really cautious. Thank you.
Thank you.
My talk. Did I get it in with 20 minutes?
You did. You
Okay.
just hit the mark. Fantastic.
Yes, Christina, you had something to say.
Please.
No?
No,
No, we had
there
a
was
question in the
clarification.
Okay.
There was a clarification question about let it go.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
Yeah,
Oh,
Nicole was able to field that in the chat for us about what you meant by let it go. But in case anyone can't read it in the chat, the question was, when you let them go, do you let the players go back into the studio space without masks, or do you just physically just let them go and not participate for a time being? And it is the latter. It is to let them not participate at this time.
These folks have checked out drums and are playing at home, and that's cool. You know, you just have to let them be them.
fantastic.
Yeah,
At this time, I'm going to, you don't mind, I'm going to sort of moderate some of the Q&A going on. Some of it is happening in the chat, so I think that I actually appreciate that. So we're just not all talking over each other.
Now, let me just point out, Nicole is the artistic director of our group, so she's been in this process the whole time. I forgot, I skipped the step where I had performers review it first before I put out the stuff to the community group, and Nicole was part of that process.
Okay, good. There's some good, really nice nuts and bolts kinds of questions, so I'm going to relay them. And Karen, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
First question here coming on, how are you cleaning drums and bocce?
Okay, that's great. I've been wondering about this too. I've been asking around and told witch hazel doesn't really work. Someone said witch hazel, but witch hazel doesn't have an antiseptic in it or a disinfectant in it. So we are using a very, very, very weak bleach solution, which we spray on paper towels and quickly wipe where anybody's touched. First, we tell people, don't touch them too much. You don't need to touch the heads. You can actually move a drum if it's on wheels by just pushing the mimi. If you are having to move drums together, you really only need to touch the cons. So number one, touch the drums as little as possible. Number two, keep track of where you touch them. At the end, wipe them quickly with a bleach solution. I know there's a lot of people who don't want to use a bleach solution on the hides. For now, that's the best thing I've come up with. And if people have, this is where I haven't done a lot of research, so if people have better solutions for the cleaning of the drums, I would love to hear them. We leave the drums out on the floor because, again, we have the gift of this space so that people don't have to go into the drum storage room, which is a very small space. We just cover them, and that way minimizing the touching.
Excellent. Thank you. Another thing that, Nicole, actually, I see that you sort of had something else that went along with this. Would you mind?
Yeah, so in working in the studio and talking about cleaning the drums, we're also going to experiment with taking masking tape and taping spots on the drum to be like, hey, this is where you're touching, this is where you're supposed to touch, this is where you're going to disinfect. I've noticed in working with the drums just by myself, it's really hard when you're moving drums around to keep track of all of the places on the drum that you've touched, even if you're only moving the drum by touching the mimi. There's several mimi. So we're going to try and mark off the spots around the rim of the drum, around the fuchi, where it can be like, hey, touch me here. So those are the only places. And then probably once a week, shift where that tape is, so we're not always using the bleach solution on the same part of the drum.
Yeah, this is a good example to stay flexible because this is going to be an ever-developing process.
Furthermore, there's an expansion on that. If you could share the bleach recipe you're using.
Yeah, it's in one of the signs that I have. I think it's a 3% solution that we mix up. But I will, let's see, let me make sure that's here. In the signage, I will give you the disinfecting protocols. This is for everything in our studio.
Yeah, would you be amenable to sharing, like?
Yeah, I just put the document there.
Cool, awesome.
And like I said, if anybody has some ideas on what's better, I know people are talking about like the UV lights and that stuff. Let us know, because I'm sure there's a better solution than a bleach. It's what we have right now.
This came up. This is actually this is a very good question. If you wouldn't mind, I know that I don't want to get too off topic, but
Mm.
Katsuji
Hmm.
Katsuji Asano, as you're on this call, do you have any recommendations for ways to disinfect the equipment itself?
Um,
Sorry, no, I'm actually asking Katsuji.
I see. Okay, because I was going to make up something that,
基本的なことは、アルコールとかエタノールの70%以上のものを使ってほしい、です。で、直接太鼓に濡らすんではなくて、一旦、布に湿らして、拭く。で、その後空拭きで必ず拭き取るっていう作業を繰り返す。で、多分秒と缶は錆びると思う。錆びてくると思うんだけど、今はそれよりは、除菌が大事なんじゃないかなっていう思います。
So he says his recommendation is a liquid that has over 70% of alcohol ethanol content, and to not directly spray it on whatever surface you're cleaning, but to put it on a paper towel or something and then wipe. And soon after, you should wipe it with a dry towel. For any surface. Possibly your cons or your metal parts might start rusting, but in terms of safety, that is a better practice. And he does not recommend bleach. Not recommend any kind of bleach. Yeah.
Excellent. We will switch to a 70% alcohol solution this afternoon.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Very
割れて
appreciate that.
絶対もう触らずに濡らさない方がいい。
Okay.
破れちゃうんですよ。
He also added that when the surface of the hide, the upper layer starts cracking, like once that starts happening, he does not recommend any kind of alcohol to touch that surface. So make sure that those are the surfaces that no one should be touching either.
Gotcha. Well, that unfortunately includes most of my drums at this point. So, yeah, the winter gets dry. Anyway, excellent. Thank you so much for that insight. I'm going to go back to our questions. Sorry, backing up just a little bit. The question, Karen, where does your comfort level fit into?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I am vulnerable to the virus, or if I get it, I'm going to be vulnerable. I've had respiratory issues. I've had pneumonia. I have scars on my lungs from childhood pneumonia. So I've pretty much taken myself out of the mix of instructing. I am like Sauron driving from behind. Lord of the Rings reference. So the initial pods we set up don't have instructors. They are self-guided, and Nicole is crafting curricula for those people to use if they don't have an instructor present. Because our instructor pool are all number twos on the risk tolerance. I'm sort of pushing myself to be in with the twos so that I can play on Monday with the performers. Unfortunately, we all ranked ourselves as a 2. I am not going to go into the studio right now with anyone over 2, because my responsibility now that I am with a pod of 2s is that I not expose myself to higher risk pods. If I do, I have to inform people in my pod, and probably I will have to opt out of that pod, or they will kick me out, opt me out, and I'll have to join 3s. So I have to follow the risk protocols too. But I made a decision early on not to put myself into the mix of instructors, because I felt it would also not be entirely fair if we had 4 pods of players at different levels and I only worked with one of them. Not that I am so wonderful to work with, but I am the leader of the group. And I think Nicole's in the same position. If she were to work with one of those pods and not the other 3, there would be, that situation might be ripe for disgruntlement, and we must avoid that. Do you have anything
Karen,
to say, Nicole?
yes, I do. What we, in this kind of hybrid no instructor thing that we're doing, however, is we are having instructors on call, either a phone call away or a Zoom away, because we have Wi-Fi in our space, that we will be available to talk, watch, help out from a distance without being in the space, but still be there as support for our students.
Yeah, so providing curricula, providing on-site feedback, and continuing our Zoom meetings. I'm going to assume most people are doing some form of Zoom meeting with their members and students. So we're going to continue those so that the people who are zeros and ones can continue to practice each week. But we're slowly phasing them out a little bit, like moving to every other week with some sessions, trying to combine some sessions so we don't work harder than we need to. Great question, Eileen.
Thank you. Fantastic. There's still a couple other questions that were coming in regards to the sanitizing. So I'm I'm definitely, this wasn't planned necessarily, but I do appreciate that we have a couple of people who might have some expertise on equipment, make
A little bit.
drums and other equipment themselves. So sorry, I don't mean to put anyone in the spotlight necessarily, but the question of as far as the alcohol solution, Katsuji, again, I'm going to unmute you if you don't mind. People are wondering about bachi. Is there a way to sanitize bachi? Would the bleach work for bachi? Or would that also be an alcohol solution?
ガチだったらアルコール使うかな、ブリーチ使ったりしましょう。He says he's never used bleach, so he doesn't know if that's okay or not. But so he would use the same solution, the alcohol solution, over 70% for the bachi too.
Thank you. Not that you know, one possible solution for people to consider as well is don't share bachi.
Yeah, that's one of the pillars too. The hygiene part is don't share equipment.
But that, you know, for some people that might not work if you have sort of group bachi. Thank you. There was another question. I just want to make sure that everyone got to see this. This was in regards to when you're sanitizing using cloths. Should you be using disposable cloths, or even if you're not, like, should you be just disposing of the cloths as you're sanitizing? So.
Yeah, I managed to score some paper towels, so I left a lot of paper towels there. I assumed most people are going to want to spritz the paper towel and then use it and toss it. There is also clean rags there if people are being more environmentally conscious, with a dirty rag bin right next to it, so they can use the clean rag, throw it in the dirty bin, and then I get to do lots of laundry. But that's part of being a leader, the laundry. So we offer both choices, and I think it's depends on the person. I wouldn't want to use a cloth over and over again. You know.
Yeah. I do want to also, I mean, I think that these are all fantastic questions, and I know that everyone is seeking information. You know, there's a lot of information in regards to what the CDC position is on you know, sanitizing and things like that. Again, like I don't know that we can fully hash out a conversation about, you know, things like masks and face shields, and, you know, which is necessarily going to you know, I think that there could be a variety of differing sort of opinions and as well as backgrounds in those kinds of things. And yeah, there's I would recommend that these are the questions that we do want to start putting together, because you will yourself, as Karen said, need to basically understand what your, you know, what what's your own comfort level, what's your own policy, what's your position on all of these things. So it's important that you kind of know that, you know. I just want to avoid spending the next 30 minutes talking about the virtues of all these various things. So let's see. Yeah, there's a number of questions. There's some discussion and question coming in about the virtual space. And as much as I can appreciate that, and I as well have tons to talk about on that, that is kind of a different sort of meeting. Again, I want to keep us on task with talking about a return to in-person taiko practice right now. So.
And Nicole has put her email there, so if people want to talk about that more, she's willing to do that. In short, we kind of started off with chants and body percussion and stuff, and some people have drums, and sometimes it's just talking, so it's kind of a mix.
Yeah. This is a question about how has the physical distancing requirement changed the nature of your practice, or has it? Well,
we've only been in the studio once as a group of more than 2 people. It didn't, I don't think it changed things really. Nicole was there. I felt like it was pretty much a regular practice, except we were a little further apart and more careful of each other. Go ahead, Nicole.
I do have to say, as an instructor, taking an instructor position for one part, helping somebody with form, it is dangerously easy to forget that you need to stay far apart from somebody when you're trying to look at their form and help them out. So that is a pitfall that you have to watch out for, because I found myself trying to get really close to look at this person's form and had to remember that, no, I needed to stay away. So that's one area that it can be tricky.
Yeah, it really helps. That's why it's important to get everybody's buy-in, because if you forget for a moment, the other person can remember and start backing away. And then you're like, oh, right, because we're not able to remember everything all the time. So having the more people understand the protocols, the better.
Coming to this question here, how did you come up with the fixed maximum number for the beginning pods?
I'll admit it was a little on the arbitrary side. The risk tolerance chart that Dr. Dacker put out had groups of 10, and a lot of CDC information had groups of 10. I felt that because we're doing something where we're breathing heavily, yelling, moving, that it should be fewer than that. And I decided to err on the side of caution by going with 6 in our humongous studio. I talked to Jen Caballero about this. Their studio is smaller, and when I had heard about the size of their studio, I'm like, geez, I wouldn't want to have more than 4 people in there at a time, if that. So I think you need to figure out, according to safety regulations and the size space you have, and the ventilation, and the buy-in to sanitary protocols that your group members are following, how many people, based on those things. You need to look at all of it. Your pods are going to be a different size. If my pods work out well, my hope was that in a couple months we could grow the 6 to like 10 people. But right now we don't even have a pod of 6 people. There's 4, 2, and maybe 4 or 5.
Without getting too deep down this other sort of rabbit hole, I do want to address this because this question was brought up. I'm wondering if you could sort of answer in a simplified way of, has the process you've been doing for getting back into practicing together been approached as a way of getting back into performance?
No. We had every gig, like most people, canceled through the end of the school year, and in Tucson there's very little to do in the summer, so basically our next gig was going to be November anyway. So Well, there's one in October, but I'm kind of thinking that festival's going to be canceled, so we may not really have a choice, so we're not talking about it yet. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Excellent. There's another question. This is yeah, nuts and bolts kind of thing. How do you address the question of air quality within your space?
Again, we have the luxury of a humongous space with we call here swamp coolers, which you can use in dry climates. It's basically a big fan that sucks water through a sponge, and in the dry heat, sucks the dry air through the wet sponges, and it cools the air that way. So it creates a huge amount of airflow itself. We have fans, and we have like I said, a huge space. We have ceiling fans. We open the loading dock door, basically trying to get as much air moving out as possible.
Excellent. All right. I thank you. These are all great questions, and I apologize in that there's some sort of routes that I'm trying to keep us from going down because of the endless sort of.
Yeah, and it's fine. This is the first, like we said, of many conversations. There are people working more on these subjects, more in depth. That information is going to be coming out. This is really an initial get together to see, to show you one process, to help you thinking about these things, to help you start thinking about these things. And then there'll be lots of more information coming out from TCA. I think Karen Young and Michelle are working on something. You're going to get lots of information.
Excellent. At this point, not that you can't still ask questions of Karen and the processes that she's been through, but at this point, there are a lot of people on this call who have been going through similar processes. So I would like to invite people, if you could, start your response like Jeopardy, in the form of a question. What was the question that you had to answer in order to return to thinking about in-person taiko work? And if procedurally, just to make this again not a free-for-all, if you wouldn't mind just using the hand raise feature. If you're not sure how to use the hand raise feature, you can dance wildly. Yeah, flail about. I prefer dance wildly, but I guess we'll leave it up to you just to get our attention. But I'll be monitoring the things to find out any sort of additions that people have that we didn't cover as far as kinds of questions and things that you had to, in your specific experience, need to have answered. Is anyone dancing wildly? Oh, Mr. Kurt Griffith. Awesome. I'm going to go to Kurt first, and then over to Isaku's fantastic dance. Thank you. But first, Kurt, what kinds of questions have you been encountering? I'm sorry, I'm still trying to unmute you. I'm not sure why it's not.
Are you muted? Did you mute yourself, Kurt?
Oh, here,
Never mind.
muted now.
That good?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Well, Shango Percussion, we're in a small town, so we don't own our spaces. We typically work in two local spaces. One's a music cooperative, and the other is kind of an arts and a community arts center. And the first question is, when are y'all opening up? And are you comfortable with having us noisy people back down in there? And that's been an ongoing conversation the last couple of weeks. West Virginia has just been opening up the last couple of weeks. So far, what we've decided is that the core group, Shango Percussion, we're looking at restarting on the 22nd, and the following week, a Intro to Taiko workshop that I had put together for the beginning of March is being pushed to the fifth weekend. Those are two different venues, and we're in the process of talking with the venue owners, like, okay, what do you need from us? and then coming up with an appropriate protocol. The group in a way is easier because we're kind of all of an age, with about, as Karen pointed out, roughly similar risk factors. The workshop is a different animal. We're going to probably have to have tighter protocols because the people are going to be more of a random mix of folk, and they're going to have to buy in. And we're talking about a pretty strict attendance limit based on the size of the space we'll have. So we'll probably top out at 8 participants, myself included.
All right. Oh, sorry.
Can I comment? Most people I think are using other people's spaces, and I think it's important that you meet with the owners or whoever you're renting from and have some common understanding of what they're doing to reduce risk as well. Because if you walk into a space where there were just 50 people chanting and they didn't sanitize after, you need to build in time to sanitize the space for your group. Something to think about. You have to work with the owners.
So I think that is a very good point, and the first question of this is really for the space itself, because a lot of us don't are in exactly the same boat in that we're using a different space. So you have to, I believe that the conversation, rather than it is more of a conversation and dialogue, and if possible with also the other people who are using that space.
Yeah.
I had a meeting actually from my space, not from my space, not from my space, from my space that I use.
Language.
I know.
The studio you use.
It was a meeting with all of the renters and also the faculty there, talking about all of these various questions that people have, and also to get a sense of what everyone is comfortable with as far as policies for the space versus the policies that are for their own individual groups as well. So thank you. That's it. It's a very relevant question, Kurt, for us to be able to answer. I'm going to turn now to Katsuji Asano, or over to Isaku. I'm not sure which one of you had the question. Yes, Isaku, thank you.
So one of the issues that we've been discussing is in relation to liability, like legal liability. And one of the measures that we've discussed is liability insurance, and also making sure that everybody is clear with the measures that we're taking, and to really kind of make a active effort to let everyone know what we're doing. And so far, we've kind of just, throughout our discussions, we've kind of come to the conclusion that it's possible to mitigate the risk as much as possible, but probably not completely eliminate. I was wondering if anybody had any experience or had any thoughts or what they're doing in terms of legal or possible legal issues.
So I'm just going to take this real quick because I had to address that since I own the building. First thing is, we have to have a liability policy anyway to operate the building. So check to see that it will cover things surrounding the COVID-19. The other is we had all users signing waivers that will release us any claim on us for, even if they follow all the protocols. By even stepping on the premises, they are waiving any claims against and releasing us for any liability. So have a waiver. I posted the sign right in the front door. The minute you enter the building, you are agreeing to follow the protocols and waiving us the liability, however to say that, releasing from any liability, specifically involving a COVID-19 infection. So good. That's a good point. And you might want to have your group members sign waivers as well.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's a very important point. I like that you brought up that idea of what Karen has been doing, which is real transparency, clarity of what steps you're holding. I think that was something that's very important, so that everyone knows what steps you're taking. Liability insurance, it's a thing. I don't know how many of you guys have it. But knowing if you're not in your own space, how much does their insurance cover? I actually have to have my own liability insurance in order to operate within several of the spaces that I do anyway. So
There are some great templates online now because other businesses have had to address the opening up thing. So if you go to search COVID-19 liability waiver, you'll come up with everything from a 1-pager to a 20-pager. And you can just kind of use that as a template, depending on your appetite for legal language. We made ours very short. But you can just steal that from online.
waivers as well. All right. Thank you. Other people wildly dancing out there?
Lucy!
Lucy. Oh, yes. Lucy, where are you? Oh, there you are. Wait, I didn't see the dance, Lucy.
No, she just came on.
Oh, I see.
I was just exclaiming, Lucy, because,
Okay. Yeah, that that doesn't have, because now I'm gonna unmute her and make her dance, right? That's
Richard.
Karen.
It looks like Eileen Morgan has her hand up.
Yes, Eileen, there you are. Thank you very much.
All right. A couple of things. I'm starting up a class tomorrow, and I'm limiting it to 9 people with all the protocols. We also have First Friday tonight, which I have canceled because you cannot trust the general public to just come in and follow your rules. We have mats. We have a lovely bamboo floor, but we have mats down. So we have a vacuum cleaner with HEPA filter. So I'm wondering if a HEPA filter is enough for vacuuming those mats. I don't know if Olga, if you can speak to that. Olga's still there.
I'm here, sorry. I have no idea. I was just writing that down as like, oh, I should look into getting with a HEPA filter because I just use a cheap vacuum. But I imagine we could find that on CDC. What kind of mats, or what are the mats made out of, Eileen?
They're like the cheer mats, the tumbling mats. So it's kind of like an indoor-outdoor mat, carpeting on top, and then the foam underneath.
I guess if it was me, I would just want to stay away from anything that like can't be kind of washed, down with like the alcohol or the bleach solution. Although it depends, so much depends on the mat. Like what kind of masks are people wearing? N95? Are they wearing surgical masks? I mean, if people are wearing N95 masks, you basically should have no droplets to worry about. These are, anyway, we should talk more later. Sorry, because I know it's 4:02 and there might be other things.
Okay.
I appreciate that. But yeah, I think that's a whole other stream we get into. But I mean, I think it is important to have an understanding of these things. As many details as you have an understanding that you're putting into practice, policies or even practices, and making sure certainly that everyone is aware of them. I'm sorry, I'm going to go. I'm going back a little bit, and I'm actually asking because there was a question specifically, and I don't want to ignore Isabel. Did post a question up here. Something about anyone thinking on ozone purifiers and looking for their tiny space. If someone has actually an answer to ozone purifiers, is anyone looking into that?
If I could speak to that for a moment, I've been doing research outside of arts organizations on current best practices that we're seeing across industries for like reintegration back into society. So one of the things that we're noticing in like the VA hospital system, for example, is the employment of ozone purifiers to improve air quality, even amongst staff who are required to wear masks for an extended period of time. Not to say that they're doing heavy breathing compared to what we would be doing like at the height of practice, but that is certainly an option. And ozone purifiers and their quality, I would just recommend to do a lot of research on before you purchase anything such as that for your space, because you know your space and your needs better than anybody else. Other alternatives that hospitals are using currently to sanitize without using harsh astringents includes UV light exposure as a way to sanitize lightly contacted areas, and infrared lights as a way to sanitize paperwork, parcels, packages, and documents that transfer from hands to hands quite frequently. So those might be alternatives if it's within your financial capacity, as something to sanitize, like group sets of bocce, for example. And those are alternatives that I recommend everyone just do some research on and look into.
And I think there's a general sense that 72 hours of something not being handled or touched will probably eliminate surface transmission. So if we don't have a practice for 72 hours, we just leave the drums out, let them be aired, and we don't sanitize them.
All right.
Like the insurance companies, like, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I admit I haven't talked to my insurance company, and I'm seeing this thread, and I have a feeling it's going to be that. It's going to be they can't cover it. It's a pandemic. That, yeah, that you just have to try to get everybody to sign the waivers and be responsible if you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Moving forward is there's going to be some risks involved, but if you can get out ahead of people's fears and let them know the minute they walk in the building that they're assuming responsibility for themselves, I think you're less likely to have a problem.
Good point. This is in regards to a couple comments on insurance, and yeah, there's liability insurance does not necessarily, especially in this climate, is not necessarily going to protect. Also, you know, if you have waivers, which I do, which don't mention a pandemic,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe that's something you need to start putting it. But it is really a lot about the awareness. You know, even if people sign waivers, there's still legal grounds for you know, some of this to happen.
Yeah. If they're really determined to sue you, even a hold harmless or a waiver won't hold up. I'm just going to share something really quickly about our building. So it's in a kind of an industrial area, but there are still some people living there. And this is just to illustrate that you can get out ahead of this and be proactive and inform people, so there's less likelihood of being slammed later. So when we moved into our building, I knew these residents were going to be having possibly a problem with the noise level. So I went to each of them with some donuts, and I told them what was going to be happening in the building. And I gave them my phone number. I explained what our purpose was, and I said, if there's ever any trouble, you call me before you call the police. I will come fix it. So with this situation, letting people know the minute they enter the building, they're assuming some risk on their own, I think is important. You're not just opening up and letting everybody use everything and be hog wild. They are, by even participating, assuming some risk, and be really clear about that up front. That way you're less likely to get broadsided later.
Excellent. As we're winding down, then I did want to ask if there are still, as of yet, more kinds of the questions that people have encountered in your own quests to return to playing in real life taiko. I'm looking around. I don't see any wild dancing.
Studies in stillness.
Yeah. Well, listen, I as Karen mentioned, this is an ongoing competition. This is not the end all be all kind of definitive way of doing things. But I do, first of all, I want to thank Karen very much for sharing a tremendous amount of information. These resources, which we are going to put up this video, and we'll also put up the links to the resources that she has created or has access to. And I think those are incredibly helpful, even just as a great sort of starting off point for a lot of us. The situations are different everywhere, as we said, but nonetheless, I think everyone, I'm imagining everyone is just really, really hoping to get back to playing with other people in the same room sooner rather than later. So anyway, I think with that, Karen, did you have any sort of closing thoughts or anything you'd like to share?
Just release yourself to the process. Things are changing every day, so don't get overcommitted to one path because you might have to switch directions really quickly. Have faith in your group members. They're going to be your support team right now. Pick the people among your group are going to support you in this because it's hard. That's what they're there for. That's why we're teams. That's all. And call me if you need, or call each other. Everybody has their own expertise.
Yeah. Thank you again to everyone for all your questions, for listening, for being a part, of course, as always, of this fabulous community. Thank you so much as well. I want to thank Katsuji for kind of weighing in on some of the equipment things. We didn't necessarily plan that, but it's really nice that he happened to be here. So thank you so much. And again, to everyone, please stay safe, stay strong, and yeah, we'll see you all at some point behind the drums. All right.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Yes. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Bye, thank you.
I'm muting everyone so you can say your farewells as well.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Good to see everybody. Thank you.
Well
Thank
done.
you.
Familiar faces. Stay
I know,
safe,
it's so great
everybody.
to
See your
see you all.
faces. See ya.
Thank you,
Bye.
Mark. I didn't even say thank you. Sorry. Oops.
Everyone.
I didn't thank Christina. I didn't thank Mark. Duh.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you, Christina and Mark. All right, I'm heading out. Again, call me if you want to talk more. Bye, guys.